Yang. Thanks for joining us. Tuesday marks 1 year since Taiwan President Lai Ching-te took office. The president took the podium to lay out what he has in store for the next 3 years of his term. Reporter Leslie Liao was at the speech and brings us the main points.
As the famous saying goes, it's all about the economy. President Lai Ching-te spent much of a speech on his 1-year anniversary in office talking about economic issues. He said that Taiwan needs to wean off its reliance on being an export-driven economy, but also expand into other markets. He added that he'll make Taiwan's interest the highest priority in ongoing trade talks between the U.S. and Taiwan, and that he'll establish a sovereign wealth fund. Lai also spoke on many domestic issues like climate change, healthcare, and social stability. He committed to the government's goal of making Taiwan a net zero carbon emitting country by 2050. And he added that he'll also invest around $33 billion in Taiwan's green energy sector by 2030. On healthcare, Lai said the government will continue to support programs like disease control and cancer treatment. Throughout his speech, Lai consistently called for unity and democracy, saying that Taiwan's democratic system was one of its most treasured qualities.
我相信没有任何一个台湾人会放弃民主自由的生活，也没有一位总统可以背离民主自由的价值。
One point that was notably missing from Lai's speech is China. Lai has made countering Chinese infiltration and strengthening Taiwan's defenses against threats from across the strait a priority in his first year in office. But his speech didn't really mention China, and he only said in a Q&A session after the speech that he'd be willing to talk to China, but only on equal footing. Now, Lai's 1 year in office comes as there are steep divides between Taiwan's ruling and opposition parties. One of the biggest recent sticking points is a $13.5 billion special budget that the ruling Democratic Progressive Party's cabinet wants to pass. But Taiwan's opposition, which holds the legislature, has slapped down the ruling party's special budget amid concerns about the country's energy policy. And that's why Lai mentioned his commitment to green energy in his speech today to reiterate his support for the current course. But he also told opposition lawmakers and opposition leaders that he's willing to talk.
我将指示国安团队着手规划，向在野党主席进行重要国安情势简报，期望朝野政党领袖，无论政治立场为何，我们都能够以国家利益为优先。
Taiwan's opposition has responded, saying it's willing to consider Lai's proposal while also questioning its timing.
他所提出来要坦率真诚交换意见，共商国事，到就职1周年才抛出，其实已经拖延了许久。
Eric Zhu, the leader of the main opposition Kuomintang, says that the challenges that Taiwan faces can't be solved in a day, but he hopes that this is the beginning of new substantial exchanges and a chance to bury the hatchet. Justin Wu, Joseph Wu, and Leslie Liao for TaiwanPlus.
President Lai's first year in office has been marked by complicated political infighting, growing threats from China, and new relationships that may not be so easy to navigate. For more on how Lai handled domestic and international hurdles in his first year as president, Alec McDonald spoke to Karis Templeman, research fellow at the Hoover Institution.
So to start off with, what has been the main features of Lai's first year as president?
Well, I think the most striking feature of Lai's first year as president has been the just constant partisan fighting between the executive branch and the legislature. I've been a bit surprised at how deep and broad the animosity is between the ruling party, DPP, and the opposition, TPP and KMT. I didn't expect it to get this bad this quickly.
So do you believe that this partisanship is a defining challenge of Lai's first year as president?
I think it was an obvious challenge for him from election night on, when the results were known. I mean, he only won 40% of the vote, even though he won the election. And so he was a minority president from day one. And on top of that, his party, the DPP, lost their majority in the legislature. And so it was obvious to everyone that he needed some cooperation from the opposition parties to be able to get anything through the legislature. So I was a bit surprised and a little bit disappointed, frankly, that he did not seem to reach out to the opposition effectively in that window between the election and the seating of the legislature. And he really has tried as much as possible, seemingly, to ignore the opposition in the legislature. And I think that is a major source of the kind of problems he's had over the last year.
So as we have been discussing, Lai Ching-te's first year has not been without controversy or plenty of challenges. But what do you think some of his real successes have been?
Well, I think I noted he had a fair amount of continuity with his predecessor Tsai Ing-wen's policies. In some cases, that's been a really good thing, I think. None more so than in U.S.-Taiwan relations. There was some considerable concern in Washington, D.C. when Lai was a candidate to be president that he would be more challenging to deal with than Tsai Ing-wen, that he would create a fair amount of uncertainty in the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. And I think, for the most part, he's alleviated some of those concerns. The real source of uncertainty now in the bilateral relationship is actually on the U.S. side with the new president, Donald Trump, and his kind of unpredictable approach to almost all kinds of foreign policies. So Lai, by contrast, actually looks like a stabilizing force in the relationship right now. And I think we ought to give him credit for doing the kind of hard work of alleviating worries about his approach and building up the relationship with American interlocutors. A related point is on defense and civil society resilience issues. Lai has kind of stayed the course that Tsai Ing-wen put in place. And if anything, he's really doubled down.
That was Caris Templeman, research fellow at the Hoover Institution. At least 3 people are dead after a car crashed into passersby at a busy New Taipei intersection. Police say this may be a case of negligent homicide, though they've yet to determine the cause of the crash. As John Van Trias reports, the shock has reached all the way to the highest levels of government.
People on this roadside stare in disbelief as a car rushes past, swerves suddenly, and slams into a busy intersection. Dashcam footage shows the suddenness with which the car crashed into people from behind. People who were there describe a confusing scene. At least 3 people, 2 of them children, died in the crash here in New Taipei's Sanxia district. 12 more people are injured.
主攻医院收到6个重大外伤的 case， 那其中有2个进到医院的时候就已经 OHCA 了，在我们经过1个半小时的抢救，已经是宣布没办法救回来了。
Police are still trying to figure out what happened, and with the driver unconscious, that's not been easy. For now, they're investigating this as a possible case of negligent homicide. The known facts are that the driver was speeding and ran a red light, and he had no traces of alcohol in his blood. But there's still uncertainty. The same driver hit a mother walking with a stroller on the sidewalk in 2020. While that incident wasn't fatal, it's not clear if there's a connection with this crash. There's been speculation that the driver's age, 78, may have been a factor, and police aren't ruling it out. And they plan to do a psychological screening to see if mental illness might be involved. The crash has shaken the whole nation. In a speech marking the first anniversary of his inauguration, President Lai Ching-te didn't begin with any of his government's achievements, but with a promise of help to those who need it.
行政院在第一时间成立专案小组，我昨晚也前往探视伤者，后续中央相关部会和地方政府会携手合作，积极协助家属，并尽速厘清事故发生原因。
But as police gather evidence and those in government react, a stunned community is simply trying to process what happened.
当下来真的很严重，我不知道先救哪一个。怎么会发生这种事情？
Answering this last question, how this happened, will be a top priority for investigators in the coming days as they comb the crash site for evidence and, they hope, questioned the one person who might know. Howard Zhang and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
In response to the deadly crash, transport officials have just announced new regulations, including lowering the age at which drivers need to apply for senior licenses. Donald Trump says Russia and Ukraine will start ceasefire negotiations immediately after the U.S. president held a lengthy phone call with his Russian counterpart. But as Rosie Greninger reports, it's unclear when or where any talks might take place or who will participate.
After a 2-hour phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, US President Donald Trump says there's been some movement towards ending the war between Russia and Ukraine.
And I think some progress has been made. It's a terrible situation going on over there. 5,000 young people every single week are being killed. So hopefully we did something.
But that progress does not include the immediate and unconditional 30-day ceasefire that the US, Ukraine and its European allies have been calling for. Putin praised his talks with Trump as useful, saying the Kremlin is ready to work with Ukraine on a memorandum on a possible future peace treaty, emphasizing several conditions still need to be met for any ceasefire.
Вопрос, конечно, в том, чтобы российская и украинская сторона проявили максимум стремления к миру и нашли бы те компромиссы, которые бы устроили все стороны. При этом хочу отметить, что в целом позиция России ясна. Главное для нас – устранить первопричины этого кризиса.
In a social media post, Trump said Kyiv and Moscow could start ceasefire negotiations immediately. The US president, who repeatedly pledged to end the war quickly during his election campaign, has been pushing for the leaders of both countries to make a deal. Last week in Turkey, officials from Russia and Ukraine failed to reach any breakthrough in their first direct talks since the beginning of the war in 2022. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who spoke on the phone to Trump before and after his talks with Putin, said he is open to another meeting.
Ми розглядаємо в будь-якому випадку можливість зустрічі, ще раз зустрічі всіх команд. Хочемо на високому рівні. Америка, Україна, Росія і європейські НСА, представники тих країн, які зараз звучали, так і плюс Великобританія.
The Ukrainian leader said he also pushed for the US to impose further sanctions against Russia if the country is not serious about reaching a war-ending agreement. None of the parties have outlined specific details about how future negotiations will work. But after newly inaugurated Pope Leo offered the Vatican as a venue, both Trump and Zelensky suggested that could be an appropriate space to reach an agreement.
There's tremendous bitterness, anger, and I think maybe that could help some of that anger. So having it at the Vatican would be, in Rome, would be I think it would be a great idea.
It's an idea Ukraine's European allies are on board with. They've also warned new sanctions could be imposed on Moscow if the country refuses to engage in talks seriously. But with both sides seemingly expressing willingness to engage in fresh negotiations, there is renewed hope a ceasefire agreement could soon be on the table. Alex Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
The military is planning to send delegations to the US and Europe this year to study civil defense and how reservists are mobilized. In Europe, they'll focus on learning from civil defense programs, while the group heading to the US will look at how American reservists are caught up and mobilized. The military hasn't said which European countries will be involved this time, but a similar visit was made to Northern Europe last year. These efforts are part of Taiwan's push to boost its civil defense across society as it faces growing military pressure from China. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. Follow us on social media for more of our stories. Now, before we go, let's head over to Denmark for the Hunestad Sand Sculpture Festival. I'm Yvonne Yang. Take care, and I'll see you next time.